Hi, my name is Southard. I operate Southard School of Racing, which is in Florida, just a little south of Daytona. We operate the school year-round. In this video, we're going to be talking front-end alignment and geometry, and the first thing we'll be talking about is camber. Okay, as far as camber is concerned, what we would like in our race car is we've got to put a certain amount of camber, and a camber is the leaning of the tires in or out at the top. If the tire is leaned in at the top, it's negative, and if it's out at the top, in this manner, then it's considered positive. What we would like on our race car is to have the front tires lay on the racetrack as much as possible in the turn to try to get the highest possible turn speed. Realize that the car is going to roll over. Let's put it on a flat plane and put our camber in it. Realizing that we're going to have, as the wheel moves up, it will move in and cause the camber to gain, or to go to more negative. It's what we call a gain, is when it goes to more negative. So we need to start with a certain amount of camber and then move the wheel up and down, as we talked about earlier on deciding ride height, and get the camber to gain. If your camber gains a degree to a degree and a half per inch, that's the proper ride height. If it doesn't quite gain that much, then your car is a little too high, and if it gains a little more than that, then your car is a little too low. So we've got to establish our ride height, and this is a good time to double check our ride height. We're going to go out to the race car in a few minutes, and I'm going to show you how to check your camber and your camber gain, and how to put camber into the race car. As we go into the racetrack, we're going to have a turn here. I'm going to show this to extreme where the banking is, and the car is going to want to roll over like this. The right side of the car is going to want to get closer to the racetrack. As the right side of the car gets closer to the racetrack, we want the camber to go more negative so that the tires will, and on this side we want it to go more positive so that the tires will look like this on the racetrack. So as the car goes into body roll, we want the tires to roll the other direction to give us the maximum traction. If we have too much camber in the car, or not enough negative where it's setting too straight up, then obviously we'll be working on the outside of the tire, and it won't let us change direction very easily. And if it's too much camber, it'll be working on the inside of the tire and not let us change direction very easily. So no matter if we have too much camber or not enough camber, the front of the car will not change direction as readily as it should, and the car should then push. So the way to check this will be to go ahead and put the camber in the car you need, and I'll show you how to do that on the race car. But basically what we're going to do is, looking at the upper frame rail, looking down the top, we'll say this is our tire out here. We've got our upper control arm. It's mounted something like that allows the wheel to move up and down. To change the basic camber, what we've got to do is shorten this distance, so we need to move these inner mounting points in if we want to put more camber. And looking at that from the back view, the situation will look like this. We'll have a lower control arm here and an upper control arm here, suspension out to the tire, and if we'll take and move this whole suspension in at the top, which is this direction, then obviously this is going to move in, which will turn the tire more in that manner. So moving the upper control arm in will give us most camber, and that's the way it's adjusted in most race cars today. Some of the cars have eccentrics on them, like a Chrysler has an eccentric on it, where it's set offset, it's got a nut on the outside, and when you turn it, it'll actually move your camber in and out just by turning the nut that's holding this control arm. Ed Howe and Dillon and quite a few of the manufacturers are building them where you can do that. Other ones build them where you have to put shims or something behind these control arms to get your camber gain right. The upper control arm should be 50 to 60% of the length of the lower control arm. So what we mean by that is, let's say if our lower control arm is like 16 inches long, then our upper control arm should be in the area of 8 to 9 inches. So there is a relationship between the two, so that your instant center and your roll center stuff don't change too rapidly. But you can adjust these within an inch or so within reason, as far as if you've got an adjustable A-arm and still be okay in that area. But you don't want to put a real short A-arm or a real long A-arm against a short one. You'll get in some instant center and some other geometry problems that you can't live with. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to go out and we're going to lean the tire in or out until we get what we want. For the purposes of just generality, I've been using a lot of generalities in these things, but I don't know any other way to do it. I don't know what type of car you've got. But what you really need to do is go start with about 3 degrees of negative camber in the right front, and about 1 degree of positive in the left front. So your tires will be laying something like this. This will be in 3 degrees and that will be out about 1 degree. So that's a good starting point for camber. And then we'll run it through its travel. If we find out that our car doesn't have enough camber gain, it doesn't gain a degree to 1.5 degrees per inch, then we probably need to start with a little more. If it gains too rapidly, maybe we need to start with a little less, say 1 degree. If you're on asphalt or even on dirt where you can run some tire temperature tests on your car, you can decide your proper initial camber to put in a car by running your pyrometer across the tire and checking temperatures. Let's say that this was 140 degrees, 150 degrees, and 160 degrees. If the air pressure was right, and we know that that wasn't causing us a problem, if this was the reading we were getting across the tire, that would probably be about a half a degree, half a degree of camber error. About 20 degrees across the tire is only about a half a degree of error, so these settings then become very critical. Especially late in the race, if you're running 25, 30, 40 lap races, then somewhere late in the race this could cause you some very irregular wear and loss of speed through the turn. So I think camber is real important. It doesn't make sense to go and start just changing shocks and springs and stagger until you get your camber temperatures right across the tire. So if you can't do it with a pyrometer, if you've been on dirt, it's kind of a muddy racetrack, maybe you can lay your hand across it or run a couple of races and then check your tire wear. That'll tell you if the camber's about right. So camber wear will tell you, a pyrometer will tell you, and handling will tell you if it's right. Okay, now that we're back into the shop, as far as this camber is concerned, there's only really 2 ways you can adjust the camber, and that's by the shortening or lengthening of the lower control arm, which most of them are fixed, or the shortening or lengthening of the upper control arm. But what we can do, they're mostly fixed too, but most of them have an adjustment. In this case, we've got shims in the inner mounting points to move the top in or out on the upper AM. And what we've got here is what we've done is we've set the car at ride height and moved this up to half the height of a tire, and we've got our proper angle here. What we've done is we put a camber gauge on the car and set it and shimmed it until we've got our 3 degrees. That's the way we're going to start at the racetrack. Now if you'll come over to the other tire, what we're going to do then is these are dirt tires, but it doesn't matter asphalt or dirt, it's the same procedure. What we're going to do is we're going to check the tire on the inside, the middle, and the outside, and check our camber. Realize that 20 degrees across the tire is about half of a degree of angle on your camber. It's really not that hard to understand camber. What we're wanting to do is end up with equal tire temperatures here on both sides of the car. And that'll mean we've got the right camber in the car and for the car that we're going to run. So once you've got that established, you've got everything pretty right. It doesn't take much of a shim to change this thing 5 or 10 degrees, so don't overdo this thing. And just work in small increments and run a few laps and check again. The thing we want to talk about on this part of the video is caster. Caster is real important to the race car because it's the item that you can change in the race car to give the driver some feel or take away some feel in the race car and to make it lead to the left, make it pull to the right, or make it harder or easier to drive. Caster, on page 96 in the book, it explains it a little bit. You probably should read that before we go much further into this. But there's 4 things that really, there's probably 5 or 6 items, but 4 of the main items that decide how much caster you want to run in a race car. If you'll run power steering in your race car, obviously that's going to make the car easier to drive and you're going to have to run more caster. The nose weight of the car, if the car is real heavy on the nose, then you'll run less caster. If it's light on the nose, you'll run a little more caster. Kingpin inclination and driver's strength. If you have a real hefty driver, you can probably run a little more caster than if you have a light driver. But kingpin inclination is I'll show you a spindle here that I have. The kingpin inclination is the difference between this angle and this angle. This is, if this is straight up and down and this was straight out, it would be considered 90 degrees, but as you can see that this is a little more than 90 degrees. Most racing spindles come in the area somewhere between 9 and 11 degrees of kingpin inclination, where street cars are in the area somewhere between 4 and 6 degrees of kingpin inclination. And what kingpin inclination, how that affects how hard the car is to drive, is this is looking at a spindle from the side. This being more than 90 degrees shows more kingpin inclination. What I'll do is I'll use a clothes hanger here and kind of show you how this works. If this is a clothes hanger, if this was your spindle, we've got 90 degrees here, and we turn the steering wheel, and we turn the wheel this direction, that points straight out. If it's this one and we turn it, it points straight back. So what we've done is we've just moved the wheels around the car. If we put kingpin inclination in the car, in this spindle, and with more than 90 degrees, then when we turn it, it goes down. We turn this one, it goes down. So what it does, in fact, is push the wheels into the ground and therefore lifting the car in the center. So Kingpin inclination causes the car to lift. As it rotates around its axis, it'll cause the car to either become higher or become lower on the racetrack, and that can change the wedge in the race car. But in fact, what it does is either direction, if it's straight and you got zero Kingpin inclination or caster, then with the Kingpin inclination, either direction you take it, takes and puts the spindle at this location instead of at this location, and so either direction then raises the car. So if you run a lot of Kingpin inclination, that will cause the car to raise and lower more as you go around the racetrack. If you put more caster in the car, that will cause the car to raise or lower more. Caster is the one you can't see. You have to look through the wheel. To put the caster back where it was at, we have to do that to change directions. So if we had our spindle like this, and then we put more caster in it, we're actually raising this point. So now to change direction, we've got to put that point back down here. We've got to lift the car that much. So the caster we put in the car decides how much we're lifting with the steering wheel. That gives us the feel. And then our Kingpin inclination working around that causes it to change even some more. So Kingpin inclination is one of the factors that decides how much caster you want to run in the race car. If the car is too hard to drive, you have too much caster in the car. If the car is too easy to drive, you don't have enough caster in the car. You should be able to finish the race comfortably, but you shouldn't have lots of energy at the end of the race. It should take energy to drive this race car because that's the feel you have. If you take all the feel out of the race car, you're probably going to get into trouble with the car darting, or maybe even go so far as to spin out or crash the car because of no caster. So you never want to run in a zero caster condition. But you also don't want to have to be at the end of the race looking over your shoulder to see who's going to pass you because you're so tired and you're just waiting for the white flag, so they're hoping the race is going to be over soon. That means you've got too much caster. So at the end of the race, you should have enough energy to still be trying to pass somebody rather than just trying to hang on. So that's how I decide how much caster to run in the race car. Basic caster settings in the race car, if you don't know what to start with a car with power steering, I would start with like 6 in the right front of positive, and the left front I'd run it like 4 degrees of positive. And the reason we're going to run different is we want the car to lead the left. I want it to turn left easier than it turns right. Your car, as you go down the straightaway, if you turn loose the steering wheel, it should wander to the left. So that's the reason for running the different caster on this side than this side. So you run a little more caster on the right side of the car than you do the left side. That makes the car tend to want to roll to the left all the time. That helps you as you enter the turn, but doesn't take all the feel away. If you have too much split, then it'll just run through the turn and you'll just have to hang on the right side of the steering wheel down the straightaway, and that's not a good idea either. So if the car is leading too much to the left, close up your stagger. If it's pulling too, or running too straight and you're using too much energy to get into the turn, you feel like it's just too hard to muscle it down to the turn, then you need to put a little more caster stagger in the car. So run like 4 and 6 with power steering, 1 or 2 degrees one way or the other, according to your field and your size and the Kingpin inclination and the nose weight of the car. And then if we go to a car without power steering, we're going to run something like 1 on the left side of the car positive. On the right side of the car, we can run like 3 in the positive condition. That gives us still our 2 degrees of lead, but the car is going to be drivable without power steering. That's for most drivers. Okay, now if we get into a situation where we're running a low Kingpin inclination, like on a street automobile, we realize that's not going to lift the car. We probably need to bring this one up to 2 and this one up to 4 on the positive. So that would be for a street car spindle with not too much Kingpin inclination. This would be with 9 to 11 degrees Kingpin inclination, and this would be with power steering in your race car. So that's kind of the 3 settings that I would start with, and then go by the driver feel. If the car's too easy to drive, as I said earlier, put more caster in the car. If it leads too much, close up the stagger. If it doesn't lead enough, open up the difference between the 2 casters in the race car, and that'll get the problem solved. What we're going to do now is go out to the race car, and I'll show you how to set the caster in the race car and what you look for as far as some areas you could get into as far as the caster is concerned. Caster also affects bump steer, and that's the next part of this the video. So when we get into doing the bump steer in the race car, you realize that changing the caster affects the bump steer drastically. So we're going to have to establish a caster we're going to run before we go through the rest of our settings on the race car. So right after you get the camber right, let's go ahead and get the caster right. And if you ever change the caster, realize it's going to affect some other things in the race car. But harder to drive further back, easier to drive further forward at the top. What we've got here on setting the caster is a strut rod type suspension. It has a strut rod that goes forward off the control arm that you can adjust the bottom of the control arm farther forward and back. But I think you should be real aware here that you could get this to a point where it might bind up on the inside one way or the other when it comes up. So I use the strut rod on this type suspension to adjust it so that it's in the center. And then I go to the upper control arm and put shims in the front or back to get my cast the way I want it. Now the cast in this car, zero would be straight up and down. Like that would be more positive. Back at the top would be more positive, would make the car harder to drive. Forward at the top would make the car easier to drive, or if you get beyond, it'll start darting around on you a little bit. So what we're going to do is put this on, and then we'll put a gauge on the outside, and I'll show you how to set the caster. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to change the shimming in here after we've got the bottom centered. With your double A-arm, which has an A-arm on the bottom and the top, they're almost similar. You won't have to worry about that too much on the bottom as far as the strut rod being centered, because when they're bolted in, they will be centered, so you'll do all your adjusting on the top. But if you've got the strut rod tied, be aware that I have seen them, to put cast in the car, they shorten the bottom one rather than move the top one back, and they get into a binding condition inside here. Okay, now what we've got here is a snap-on gauge for checking the caster. What we want to do is find out how far it is forward or back at the top or forward at the bottom. This gauge is made by Snap-on. It's got instructions on the back of it that tells you how to operate it. It says turn the front wheel out 20 degrees, level the gauge, then to turn the wheel in 20 degrees and take the difference in the reading. So what we're going to do here is we're going to zero the gauge. You'll turn the wheel out 20 degrees. Now you'll need to have a tire on your car so that you can use your turn plate, or you can degree the ground to find out what this is. But you need to turn the wheel out about 20 degrees, and that's about max for most cars. Okay, what we've got to do is we've got it out 20 degrees, and then we zero the gauge, and then we turn it in 20 degrees. And what we do is we'll take the difference in the reading here. Okay, that's close enough. That shows it to be almost 2 degrees in the positive side. That means that bring it back to zero. That means that the spindle is leaned back at the top about 2 degrees. Now if you get 2 degrees or more, just with the naked eye, you can stand above it and look, and you can normally see if it's further back at the top or further forward at the top. So the naked eye will show you anything more than a couple degrees. You get less than 2 degrees, 1 degree, it's pretty hard to see with the naked eye, so you need some type of tool. There's 4 or 5 different companies that makes tools to check this, and most of them have the instructions right on the back of the gauge. Like I said, this one you just turn it out 20 degrees, zero the gauge, turn it in 20 degrees, and see what the difference in the reading is, and that tells you how far it is back at the top. The further back it is at the top, the harder the car is to drive. The further forward it is at the top, the easier the car is to drive. Realize with power steering, you're going to have to run a little bit more. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about on the video will be bump steer and Ackermann. Bump steer and Ackermann are really toe changes in the race car. We're going to get into toe in the next part of the video and explain what toe settings we'd use and what will happen on the racetrack if we have it wrong, and how to do it on the car. But bump steer affects the toe in the car. What bump steer actually is let me draw you a picture here of the front of a race car, and this will be from sitting in the driver's seat looking through the engine compartment down the lower suspension on an independent suspension car. And what we've got here is a situation when we go down the racetrack and we hit the brakes, these points, the frame gets lower in the front when we hit the brakes. We all agree that when we hit the brakes, the front of the car gets lower in the front. Well, that swings this into this arc. This into this arc, this into this arc, and this into this arc. So if you'll look, you'll see that the car gets narrower as the camber changes. So when we go down the racetrack and we hit the brakes, the car actually gets narrower. Well, if our steering doesn't get narrower, what happens is that this happens. We hit the brakes, the steering doesn't get narrow, and the car does. We have a toe-out condition in a car that wants to be pretty flighty on the entry. Well, the way we can solve that, it's called bump steer, or some people call it roll steer. Is the way we've solved that is to have our steering get narrower at the same rate that our car gets narrower. So what we've got to do is we've got a steering arm comes off this spindle. We'd like it the same length as the lower control arm, and we'd like it on the same parallel. That way if the car gets narrower, the steering also gets narrower, so this happens. That's not a problem as long as it doesn't change as it moves in and out. So we need to go out to our race car and check our bump steer, and I'll show you when we get out of the car how to do that. But the basic thing we want to do is we want to make the tie rod the same length as the lower control arm and on the same parallel. The situation you get into with a lot of street cars or mixed matching spindles or something is when we get the steering arm down here, let's say that the center length was too high in the car. Well, then if the car got narrower, the steering would get wider, and that could turn into a major problem. You say, well, how much could this be? I'm just going to bolt the car together. I've seen them so bad that when I've checked them for people in the shop and fixed them for them, for every inch they moved up, they'd move out a ½ inch. And if both sides are doing that, you're talking about just 2 or 3 inches of travel being 2 or 3 inches towed out or towed in the front, and that's totally unacceptable and impossible to drive. So it's an area you need to spend a little bit of time with. On page 95 in the book, there's a little explanation of which way to go if it's a front or a rear steer to solve the problem if it is a bump steer problem. We were squaring the car in one of the earlier videos. We went from the center of the car out to the center of the tire, from the center of the car to the center of the tire, and we wanted to make sure that our long tie rod was on one side and our long A arm was on the same side, so we didn't get into this situation here. As I said a little bit earlier in the caster, you can see that could cause us a problem. If our caster steering arm was straight forward, well, that controls this height right here to the ground. And we put caster in the car, you can see then that we're moving that steering arm up, and that changes the height of this location. Well, if you change the height of that location and you don't change the height of the inner location, that can cause a bump steer error. So when you put caster in the car, a lot of times you're either going to heat this arm and bend it back down, or put some spacers in it so that lower control arm is parallel again. So that's one way that you can get into problems, is by changing the caster. Where you really get into this problem is when you go to like power steering and you move 4 or 5 degrees, more caster in the car, you can cause the car then to want to tow in or tow out by extreme amounts, something that's not acceptable to race with. In my opinion, personally, for short track racing, for dirt or asphalt, if you can get the car to move up and down to its full travel and not have over a 1/16th on each side or an 1/18th total bump error, it's probably acceptable. There's no reason why that you couldn't spend a little time and get it to exactly 0. There's 3 ways to check your bump steer on the race car, but there's probably more ways than that. There's 3 ways that I know of checking the bump steer. One is through the stringing method, and I'll show you that one. Another one would be just measuring into the frame and run the wheel through its travel and see if we get any toe change. And the third one would be by using a regular bump steer gauge that was designed just to do this one job with. So I'll show you all 3 types when we get in the shop on how to set and check bump steer in the race car. Another thing that can cause the toe to change in the race car is what we call Ackermann. Ackermann was somebody back in the 1600s that decided why the metal rings come off the wooden wheels as the buggies went around the corners. What he decided how to solve that problem was by changing his steering arm angles. And they have them in all street cars today. It's called the Ackermann Theory. Ackermann Theory, what it explains is that let's say that these 2 steering arms, it's a rear steer car in this case, it doesn't matter if it's front or rear, but if they were straight parallel with the tires, in straight lines with the tires, and they were the same length, that if you turn this one 10 degrees, that this one would then turn 10 degrees. Well, what Ackermann decided that probably was what was causing these metal rings to pull off the wheel, because when you go around a turn, the lead tire needs to turn just a little more. The way they've done that on street cars is they've taken these steering arms and they've moved them in. If it's a rear steer, and they moved them out if it's a front steer. And they shorten the center length. Now, as this one turns, if this one turns 10 degrees, that's swinging around this ball joint. Well, this one's swinging down, so it'll turn a little less. It might only turn 9 degrees. Most street cars have about 1 to 2 degrees of Ackermann designed into the car. That's so that you can drive in the parking lot at your local post office without wearing your tires out. The lead tire needs to turn a little more because of the width of the car, just to roll around the turn. Well, a lot of racing applications we've eliminated the Ackermann in the race car. And what we've done is we've taken these arms and went back to the old buggy and made them straight. Now, I'm not sure that that's a good idea either, because we do still have these radiuses on the racetrack, even though they're a lot less than going into a local parking lot. We have a little lead that needs to be actually designed into the car. I think 1 degree over 10 is what we're looking for. So if we can turn this one 10 degrees and this one turns 9 degrees, that seems pretty acceptable for short track racing. As you get into bigger and bigger tracks where you have less and less radius on your turn, a place like Daytona, you could run 0 or almost 0 lead in the car, so you wouldn't want the left front tire to turn any more than the right front, because the turn is so wide, you don't want to run in there and turn left and scrub off 3 or 4 miles an hour. So that's what Ackermann is Ackermann gives the car the ability for the lead tire to turn more than the other tire. Now, most of today's race cars, or I said a lot of them, not most of them, but a lot of today's race cars are front steer race cars. And I'll show you, if you have a front steer race car, another way that you can put Ackermann in the car. It's not really Ackermann, but it's Ackermann's theory. If both of these were the same length and we shortened this side a ½ inch, and if we turn both of them, this one would turn further than this one if we pushed it the same distance. So that's the way some people put Ackermann in the car, just by making the left front steering arm shorter than the right front steering arm. Normally a ½ inch is all that's necessary. If one is 6, the other one's 5½, that'll give you a full degree over 10 degrees of steering. There's some manufacturers that do that. When they're building race cars, you'll see that their left front steering arm is a ½ inch shorter than the right front steering arm. So that's one way of putting an Ackermann in a race car, putting a little bit of lead in the tire. But realize that if you turn this car to the right, this wheel also turns the fastest, will cause the car actually to be towed in that condition. So I'm not sure that that's real good on dirt. It probably on asphalt where you're never turning much to the right, it would be acceptable. But on dirt, I like the idea of just taking and bending the steering arms in if it's a rear steer, or out if it's a front steer. And that will solve the problem. Another way you can solve the problem is if you have a rack and pinion steering box in the car, is to put Ackermann in the car would be to move the steering box back or forward. That will put this in a different arc, one side versus the other side. So you could move your steering box back in the car like a ¼ of an inch, and that'll put a little bit of lead in the car. So if it's in a straight line, like I think it should be, most race cars, your rack and pinion to your pickup points on your steering arms should be almost in a straight line. If you move that back, then these arms are in this angle, and that'll put a little bit of lead in the car as you turn left. So there's 2 or 3 ways to put Ackermann in a race car, and it's explained pretty well in the book. And that's on page 94 in the book. So bump steer is on page 95, and Ackermann's on page 94, and it would explain how to solve a problem if you've got a problem. What we're looking for here is on bump steer to have as close to 0 error as we can through our full travel, and Ackermann would like for the left front tire to turn about a degree more than the right front tire over 10 degrees of steering. And we've got to put a car on a set of turn plates and check that. We'll now go out to the race car, and I'll show you how you bump steer the race car in the 3 different ways, and how to check your Ackermann in the race car. Okay, in this part of the video, I'm going to show you a couple of different ways you can check the bump steer in the race car, or roll steer, whatever you like to call it. First, I've taken 2 jack stands and run a string down through them, a narrow string, so you can read through it at about the right height of the race car. I've blocked the carpet right height. I went in and put 2 pair of vice grips on the steering column so that the steering doesn't move while I make these checks. What I've done, all you need to do this would be your string, your jack stands, and I like a 3-foot ruler. What I'm going to do is set this ruler at about the middle of the travel, which is 18 inches. Then I'm going to take and measure in the front, holding this tight, measure in the front and checking the distance out to the string. In this case, it's 1 3/4 inches. And then I'll check the back of the string, and it's 2½ inches. Okay, then what we want to do is we want to jack the car up. What we're looking for is to see the difference. What we want to know is if it's towing in or towing out as we check it up. So what we need to do then is move it up 1 inch. You'll jack it up, John. Right there, that's good, that's 1 inch. And then we'll want to check again. What we need to do is check this distance, and we find out that that come out to 1 5/8, and the back come out to 2 3/8. So the situation we've got here is that the wheel is moved in 1/8 in the front and 1/8 in the back. It's got further away from the string, but the same amount on both ends, so that means the bump is not changed on the race car. So as we roll into the turn, the wheel's going to get narrower, but it's not going to change the toe setting on the race car. Another way to check it that doesn't require the string and jack is just to measure into the frame. What I've done here is went over and measured the frame in this location, about 15 to 18 inches out, and the same thing in the back, and marked the frame. And then what I did is measured that distance from the frame, front and back. And then I let the car down, to let the car down 1 inch or 2, John. That's good. But what we'll do is see how much it's changed when we moved it that far. And we'll see, check the readings again, and see that it got a little bit wider. So the car got the same amount wider in the front as it did in the back, so that just meant as we lowered the car gets wider. As we raise the suspension, which lowers the chassis, the car gets narrower. But it does the same on both sides, so it's not really changing the bump on the race car or the toe settings on the race car that we set in the car to begin with. The critical things are that you make sure the steering doesn't move, so lock your steering shaft or with some vice grips or something, or lock your rack and pinion with maybe a couple of clamps to make sure that the steering doesn't move, and then move this up in increments that you can check it as though it's going to be on the racetrack. Start in the middle of your travel, run it through about 3 inches up, 3 inches down. If you get less than an 1/8 or 1/16 of an inch in area, you're probably acceptable for short track racing. Anytime you want to get less than a 1/16 of an inch on your bumper roll steer error, you're probably going to have to go to a tool of this nature. This one's made by Dixiana, and they're in the price neighborhood of $350 to $450. What this does is it's a platform that sits underneath the wheel. We need to jack the car up, lock the steering wheel the same as we did before. And we put the jack up underneath the ball joint underneath the car, and it's got a handle in here. You can jack it without getting underneath the car. It's got 4 adjustments on each corner to set the bubble so that we know that we're square underneath the car. On this case, with the narrow 5, I built a plate that bolts right on where the narrow 5 wheel would be, and I've marked it off at 1 inch increments so that I can check it at different inch levels. All you do with it is you want to go ahead and lock it and jack it up and check it at different inch increments with these dial indicators, and it'll tell you within 1,000 if the wheel's moving in or moving out. So what you want them to do is both move in and out at the same rate. It also comes with shims or a holder here for shims, and most of the time it comes with all the shims that you can go ahead and put in underneath your tie rod so that you can get your heights adjusted after you set your caster so that this bump steer error becomes very minimal. This would probably be a necessary tool if you're going to be running ASA All-Pro circuits, one of the circuits where the cars are on the bigger short tracks, the half miles and stuff like that, with very precise chassis. On dirt, I don't think it's probably necessary to go this far, although it wouldn't hurt anything. The dirt, there's a little forgiveness to it, so I don't really think it's necessary to be within 1,000, but this will get you within 1,000. I think if you can get within a 1/16 on dirt and most of your short tracks, you're probably okay. So this tool is probably going to be for the more graduated racer, for the one that's up and very serious about his racing. Okay, now what we want to talk about is Ackermann. Ackermann is what gives the car the ability for the lead tire to turn the most as you go enter a turn or go into a parking lot or something like that. Ackermann can be checked in the car by, like we've got it here, we've got it on a set of turn plates. We can set both of them at 0. We can go ahead and check the Ackermann in this car. It'd be a good time to do it. Set yours on 0 over there, Jim.
It is.
You on 0? John, if you go ahead and turn the wheel this way 10 degrees. Keep coming, right there. All right, now, if I've got 10 degrees, he should have them probably around 9 degrees. What have we got, John?
9 degrees.
Right at 9 degrees. So we've got 1 degree of lead in the car. Now let's go back the other direction to check it. Go back to 0. Okay, keep going. Tell me when yours is at 10 degrees.
10.
Okay, and mine's at 9. So we've got a lead. Either direction we turn the car, the lead wheel turns the most. Okay, bring it back to straight, John. Okay, there's 2 ways to get this. That's either by taking the steering arm and bending it, since this is a front steer car, it needs to be bent out. But if you do it that way, sometimes you get problems with the tire touching the steering arm. Another way to get it on this rack and pinion is to take the rack, the steering box, and slide it back. This one's on slide, so we just open down and slid it back about 1/4 of an inch, and that put that little bit of lead in the car. What that does is you enter the turn, it allows for the radius of the turn, and up in the middle of the turn, you're not towed in. If you had 0 toe and you went in the turn, because of the width of the car and the radius of the turn, the car would actually be towed in. So in this case, where it's got 1 degree over 10, that's what I recommend. In the middle of the turn, the car will be towed out around 3/8 of an inch, which will just about take care of the radius of the racetrack. Okay, now that we've got our bump steer and our Ackermann pretty well dialed into the area where we want to do, let's talk about the basic tow settings on the race car. As far as tow in the race car, if the front wheels are further apart at the front, that's towed out. If they're closer at the front, that's called towed in. The problems you'll get into on the racetrack, if it's misset, or if maybe whoever used the smart end of your tape just didn't make a good reading on the tape. Let's say that you went out on the racetrack and the car was towed out 1 inch. First of all, it's pretty hard to see anything less than 1 inch. If you look at a car, it's something you can see. If it's 2 or 3 inches, you can see that it's towed out or towed in. But if it's less than 1 inch, it's pretty hard to see. So you probably ought to check it every week, because it gets within a 1/2 inch or something that can give you some major problems and still not be noticeable by the naked eye. Let's say we're going to go around the racetrack and we've got a tow that's in error. Let's say that the car is towed out, for an example. First of all, if it's towed out, the car won't go down the racetrack plowing like that. Whichever tire is the heaviest in the front of the race car will take control of the race car, and most of the time that being the left front tire. So the left front tire will run straight and the right front tire will be then towed out. So if the had a missed toe on the car going down the straightaway, the right front tire will be pointing toward the outside of the racetrack. The left side tire will be pointing straight ahead. Well, now as we hit a bump or an irregularity in the racetrack, this weight will change at times. So now this at some time down the straightaway will become the heaviest tire, and the car will turn to the right. You'll then compensate with the steering wheel, turn it back. This one will be pointed toward the infield. As the car rolls back, then the car will turn toward the infield, and you will turn that back, and it will turn toward the wall. So what you'll get in a situation like this is somewhere beyond the flag stand, or after you've come up off the turn and got off the rear wheels and the car settled back in, you start getting a wandering sensation in the race car, and the driver just can't keep up with it. He's always steering the car, even when it don't look like it's necessary. It's because the toe is in error. It'll normally be from the flag stand onto the turn. Once you get to the turn, the heaviest tire is going to stay the heaviest all the way through the turn, which will normally be the right front, and you won't have a wandering sensation after you get into the turn. So this is like from the flag stand into the turn, you get a wandering sensation if the toe is just set out in error. Let's say that that your bump steer was wrong. We talked about how to fix the bump steer, but let's say our bump steer was wrong. Well, the bump steer down the straightaway wouldn't be a problem because it's only going to change the toe when you hit the brakes or when the front of the car goes down. So the bump steer will normally give you a problem in this area when you're under braking. The car might want to wander or search around a little bit. So if you've got a searching sensation as you enter the turn with the front of the car and you've got to just kind of fight it a little bit to keep up with it, you might want to look at the bump steer. If not when you're hitting the brakes, but just when you start to turn, it starts to wander, then that could be the Ackermann. It could be one wheel turning more than the other one that causes the car to wander sensation going in. So bump steer and Ackermann will cause a problem in this area, and just basic toe being wrong will cause a problem from the flag stand up to the turn. So that's the three situations you might get into with your toe. Your basic toe just being wrong, your bump steer being wrong, or your Ackermann being wrong. Well, now we fixed bump steer and Ackermann, so we need to set the toe on the race car. It's not a real difficult problem to set the toe on the race car. I've got a stick that's about 8 or 9 feet long. I make it 13 inches. What I do is I took a piece of exhaust tubing and bent it up 13 inches, which is about half the height of a tire. And I welded a little plate on the top of it, and I went the width of the car plus about another 6 inches, went up this side, bent it 90 degrees, and put a little plate on this side. Now what I can do with the front of my race car, and the whole tool didn't cost $10, is to put it around the front of the car and turn it up on its side. That will be down like this, over and up like this. Well, I'll bring it over till one side touches, then I'll measure here and check the distance there and see what that distance is. Let's say that it's 2 inches. Then I'll roll it around behind the tire and take the same measurement. If it's not 2 inches, then my toe is in error. And I'll go ahead and adjust my tie rods, whichever is the side that it needs to be according to the length of the lower A-arm. You'll want to keep them pretty constant, so you look at your A-arms, and if they're both exactly right, you might want to do a little bit of adjusting on each side until this is at 2 inches, if you wanted 0. Now most of the time what I like on a race car is for asphalt, short track asphalt, around a 1/16 out, and for dirt, about an 1/8 out. This is dirt, and this is asphalt. You can run with a little more toe out on dirt without causing any major speed problems, and yet it makes the car just seem a little more stable to be just a little more toed out. So you'd want, in this case, since you're measuring from the outside, you'll want this distance to be just a little wider than this distance. And what you want to do then is also roll the car back and forward and try it again. Check it 2 or 3 places to make sure you're not measuring off the bubble of the tire, someplace that's got an error, a bent wheel or something like that. So if you'll check it 2 or 3 places, roll the car back and forth each time you make an adjustment on the tie rod and recheck it again. That's probably the simplest way to set the toe. Another way you can set the toe would be to jack the car up on one side, get this off the ground, put yourself an oil can or something here on the ground, and put a screwdriver across that oil can until it just touches the tire, and then roll the tire. That'll put a mark around the tire. And then go do the same thing to the other tire. Just roll it. Now we've got 2 marks, and we can use a regular measuring tape between them 2 marks, front and back, and get our measurement. This takes a little more work at the racetrack than a set of toe sticks, but it's very accurate. Make sure you get up as high on the tire as you can. That's the problem with measuring like this with this type of situation is you got the frame in the way and the pan in the way in the back, and you can't get real high up on the tire so you get real accurate measurements. The more equal you are in the tire, in the center of the tire, the more accurate your measurement should be. So looking at the tire from the side, this toe stick will come out here and go up about halfway on the tire and then measure in. And so this will be our most accurate measurement from this height to this height. Measuring, sometimes with your line, you'll be down this area and you won't get as accurate of a measurement. So it'd probably be a little harder to get it exactly right. I like the toe stick method the easiest, or the best, because it seems to be the easiest, the quickest, and there's less air. It's something on the race car that probably should be checked every week. I'm not 100% sure of the reasons that it changes. Sometimes I don't hit anything. I don't bump it on the trailer, don't run it up over a tire, I don't have any problems on the racetrack, but yet 1 week to the next, it'll be an 1/8 or a 1/16 of an inch off. So it's something that should be checked every week before you go to the racetrack, and it might not hurt to take your toe stick with you, check it a couple times at the racetrack, especially if you've been run over somebody's wheel or anything that might have knocked the front end out of line a little bit. This won't normally cause you a lot of speed problems on the racetrack. Toe is not a lot of speed, but it's a handling problem, and if the driver feels a sensation that he's not comfortable with, probably won't take it in as deep, won't pick up the throttle as early, so his lap times will probably decrease, even though it's probably not a real deficit to the total handling of the car. It gives the driver the spooky sensation, and therefore the driver won't get the speed out of the car. So it does a deficit to total speed, even if it's not causing major speed problems of being a 16th out. It could cause a problem with the driver feeling like it's really bad. If the problem is you enter the turn, as you brake, then look at bump steer. As you turn the steering wheel, look at Ackermann, and if it wanders down the straightaway, just look at your basic toe setting. Towed in or towed out will cause the same thing to happen. What you'd like to do is get it a 16th for asphalt, an 1/8 of an inch for dirt, and start with that situation, and you might want to move it a 16th one way or the other until you get real comfortable with it, and then you'll be able to repeat it week after week. As far as setting the toe is concerned, what I've done here, what you can make for approximately $10, is I took a piece of 1 1/4, or you can use 1 1/2 inch exhaust tubing, make it about 105 inches long, and bend it up about 13 inches on both ends, and then put a little tab on each end of it, like that. Now what we want to do to the car is we want to go to the center of the car, find the center line with a plumb bob, and measure out to the center of each tire. And what we want to do is find for equal distances from the center of the car. If we've got a short steering arm on one side, a long steering arm on the other side, and we've got to make a long tie rod on the long steering arm and a short tie rod on the short arm, so that we don't get into an Ackermann situation when we turn the wheel. Now John, if you'll help me over there, and pick that up and bring it up against the tire, what we'll do is we'll measure in here and see what this distance is. In this case, it's 6 inches. So now if we'll take and move that around to the back of the car, and slide it up, we're measuring from the center of the tire, about halfway up, and we'll see that that is also 6 inches. So the car is straight up. That's not a good situation. We wanted the car to be like a 16th out or 1/8 out, so we can then go in here to our tie rod and adjust it to move it out a little bit. Move the car. We'll move the car just a little bit back and then forward to make sure that we haven't pinched the tire where it's going to hold in a certain position. Now we can check it again. Okay, now we got 6 and 1/8 in the rear. And right at 6 inches in the front. So it's a little closer to my stick in the front, so that means the car is towed out just about 1/8 of an inch. So in that area is what we're going to look for. It's something we need to check from week to week. The tool is not hard to build. All you need to do is check it and use a measuring tape. A second way of doing it, to move this out of the way, John, would be to jack the car up. If you give me an oil can, Jim, just one of any of them cans there, that's fine. What we want to do is give me a straight slot screwdriver. What we want to do is jack the car up, lay this in the center of the tire somewhere, and turn the tire over, and that'll put a mark right around the center of the tire, front and back. Now, we'll do that on both sides, so we'll jack it up, and now we'll have a mark right around the center of the tire. John, if you'll come to the other side. You'll see this is not as accurate. He'll simulate that there's a mark over there. It's not as accurate because we're lower on the tire, and we don't want to get into working around any of our suspension components. So we're going to be lower on the tire, and we'll measure out and see what the distance here, and then roll it around behind the tire and check the distance there. And that's another way of doing it. And all you need then is a tape measure and something you subscribe the tire with. So that's the 2 different ways that's most used in setting the toe in a race car. What we'd like is like a 16th of an 1/8 out on dirt or asphalt, and then check our tire wear and what the driver likes, and we can make fine adjustments from there. You'll find that if you're an inch out or something like that, you'll have major problems, and if you're an inch in, you'll have major problems. So neither way is going to show up as very good results on lap time. So this is something that should be checked probably every week. Wouldn't hurt to check it 2 or 3 times at the racetrack. That tool is pretty easy to carry to the racetrack, and I say for the cost of $10 in a tape measure, you can keep your running line, and as much as we got to spend on these race cars, we might as well try to get everything we can out of it. Okay, in this part of the video, we want to talk about steering ratio. Steering ratio, true steering ratio, is how far the tire turns in degrees to how far the steering wheel turns in degrees. You'll find that on page 89 in the book. What we're looking for on the racetrack is to be able to negotiate the entire turn without having to go hand over hand with our steering wheel. It's going to be hard to come back to the same place every time. What you'd like to be able to do is negotiate the entire turn without ever turning loose the steering wheel. To be able to do that, we then need, if this is our steering wheel, if we put our hand here, somewhere around the 10 o'clock position, and the other one over here around 4 o'clock, we've got the steering wheel like this. As we enter the turn, what we'd like to do is be able to go all the way around the racetrack and not turn over a half a turn with the steering wheel. You can do this pretty comfortably without getting in any trouble. What you don't want to do is have to have 2 turns or something to go around the racetrack. Well, to go around a dirt track, if the car is handling well, most say a 3rd mile, medium bank racetrack where the car is handling pretty decent, you can probably negotiate the entire turn with around 15 degrees of steering to the left, and then around 5 to 10 back to the right. So 15 degrees of steering, you need the tire to turn around 15 degrees with a half a turn of the steering wheel. To find out how quick a steering that's going to be, what you need to do is divide this 15 into 180. And 15 into 180 is 12 to 1 steering ratio. That means to turn the steering wheel 12 degrees, we'll turn the tire 1 degree. So 180 degrees will turn us enough to go through the entire turn without having to turn the steering wheel. And it still leaves us a little bit of leeway in case we didn't go quite far enough, and then we can go back the other way without our hands crossing too much. So that's the situation you're looking for, is on the short dirt tracks, you're looking at about a 12 to 1 true steering ratio. Your stock automobiles, if you've got a stock steering box, if it's power steering, most of them are a 16 to 1 steering ratio. But that doesn't mean it's going to be true 16 to 1. You need to take and check it at the tire by turning the steering wheel a half a turn and seeing how far the tires turn. Take the average of the 2 tires. This one might turn 15 degrees because of Ackermann, where this one might only turn, like, say, 14 degrees. So what we got to do is decide that it's 14.5 into 180. And that would give us our true steering ratio. If them were the numbers that we come out with turning the steering wheel a half a turn. So just because you've got a quick steering box doesn't normally mean you have quick steering ratio. The length of your steering arm off your spindle. If you use the long hole, it's a lot slower than if you use the short hole. So there's 2 or 3 ways to speed up your steering in a race car, and you're going to have to find your final steering ratio and make sure that you can negotiate the entire turn without turning loose the steering wheel, and then that'll be fast enough. On asphalt, what we want to do is be able to negotiate the entire turn without turning loose the steering wheel. But to negotiate an asphalt track, it only takes around 10 degrees of steering to the left, and maybe only 1 or 2 back to the right, unless we're in trouble. So 10 degrees of steering at the tire with 180 degrees at the steering wheel is 18 to 1 ratio. So you're going to need somewhere around 12 to 1 for dirt and around 18 to 1 for asphalt. True ratio. Now, most steering boxes that will show you a 16 to 1 ratio, like a power steering box, I've checked a lot of them, and most of them come out around 17, 18 to 1 true ratio of what it's really doing at the tire in relation to the steering wheel. And that's all that's really important to you. Don't say, well, this is a 16 to 1 box, so I know I've got 16 to 1 steering ratio. That just means inside that box is the ratio that it would have. But shortening your steering arms will speed up your steering. Lengthening your pitman arms will speed up the steering. Or you can, if you got a rack and pinion, then you can buy 2 or 3 different racks that have different ratios in them. They'll tell you that 2.5 turns lock to lock or 1.5 turns lock to lock. The fastest steering then would be for the dirt, because we have to turn more on dirt than we do on asphalt, where we only got to maybe turn 10 degrees on asphalt. We have to turn like 15 degrees on dirt to make that same transition around the racetrack. So a little bit quicker steering for dirt than asphalt. And in the area of 12 to 16, 18 to 1 true ratio will get you around most racetracks without having to do any hand over hand. If you're going to use a stock steering box, there's a shaft that comes out of the stock steering box. It goes up to the steering wheel. If that shaft is like 1.5 inches long, from the box to the end of the shaft where it's splined, that is the quick steer. That's the quick steer box. If the shaft sticks out around 3 to 4 inches, then that is a slow steer. Now you can get the slow steer box and go ahead and change the worm in it and end up with a quick steer, and you can buy that through Pontiac or through your General Motors Chevrolet dealer. So if you can go to a wrecking yard, if you're going to use a stock step front end, find yourself a stock steering box that doesn't have power steering, and then go to your local Chevrolet or Pontiac dealer and find a quick steer ratio. In their book it'd be listed as 16 to 1. Well, all you're going to have to do then is change the length of your steering shaft up to the steering wheel, because there's a difference of 2.5 inches in length there. And I would also, using a stock one, I would take that rubber or boot looking material where they bolt together out and put 2 pieces of metal in there, because you get a lot of flex in that and a lot of crash. Myself personally have spun them loose and broke the steering on. So get that little piece of fiber out of there and get it metal to metal. Another thing to think about when you're doing your steering is look at the angle of this where the steering box comes up to the steering wheel. You don't want a straight shaft, pointing straight at your chest in case of a crash, so it wouldn't hurt to put a couple of offset U-joints in it. That way if you crash, it folds up in the middle and doesn't drive the steering shaft right up into the driver's chest. So there's been a lot of drivers hurt with steering shafts. So you ought to have some type of collapsible shaft, collapsible steering wheel, and then maybe an offset shaft. With the rack and pinion where it's down in the middle of the car, your steering shaft goes down here, then goes over to that. That's not normally a problem, because if the car does crash, it won't shove the steering wheel back into the driver. So that seems to be the safest setup, is to go to a rack and pinion type steering where you've got the steering right down at the bottom. But if you've got one of these other ones, put a slip shaft in it or put some offset universals in it. So there's 3 or 4 ways to speed up the steering and slow down the steering. We'll go out to the race car, and I'll show you on the race car how you check this on the race car. Remember, the only thing that's important is what the true steering ratio is, not what your box says on it or what you think it is. You've got to go out there, turn the steering wheel a half a turn, see how far the tires turn on average, and divide that into that 180, and you will find your true steering ratio. And you're looking for a steering ratio of somewhere around 12, 13, 14 to 1 for your short dirt tracks, and on up around 16, 18 to 1 for your short asphalt tracks. Okay, now that we're back out in the shop, we're talking steering ratio. I put the car on a set of turn plates and put the turn plates on 0. I took the steering wheel and put a piece of red tape around the center of the steering wheel. This has a rack and pinion steering in it, and when I was talking about safety a while ago, I was talking about that being at an offset angle. That's what I was talking about, it being a lot safer than having the steering box straight up here that would go right back into the driver. But what I'll do here is I'll set this on 0, and then I'll turn the steering wheel, have him turn the steering wheel exactly a half a turn. Use that red light, put it right at the bottom. Okay, I've got 10 degrees of steering here. How many of you got?
11.
Okay, 10 here, 11 there, so it's a 10.5 to 1 average ratio. So 180 divided by 10.5 will give you 17.2 steering ratio. So this car has a 17.2 steering to 1. So to turn the tire 1 degree, we've then got to turn the steering wheel 17 degrees. That would be okay for short track asphalt or your longer dirt tracks, half miles or better. But if you wanted to go to like a 1/3 mile or 1/4 mile dirt, you probably need a little bit quicker steering than that. The way you can get it is they've got another box that you can buy, but that's a pretty expensive item. Or you can go out here to the steering arm and put it in the short hole. In the steering arm, this has 2 holes and it is in the long hole now for asphalt, so we'd put it in the short hole, and that would speed the steering up probably to around 14 to 1 steering ratio. So there's 2 or 3 ways that you can change your steering ratio, either by changing the box or changing the steering arms with a rack and pinion type steering. If you've got a regular steering box on the side of the car, then you can lengthen the pivot arm on that and speed up the steering ratio. Okay, the next thing we want to talk about is the brakes and balancing your brake system in your race car. Today's race car needs a really good set of brakes. Somebody will tell you, well, how can you justify using brakes when you're trying to go fast? What you're trying to do is let your brakes set the car for getting into the turn, and let you drive as deep as you can before you have to slow down to make the other exit. So somebody not using brakes and somebody using brakes, there's always going to be, if the brakes are efficient, a half second or second in lap times. Before, when we had bad brakes, sometimes when we lost our brakes, we seemed to go a little faster because we'd have to go and throw the car into the turn to get it to slow down. Today, that's not the case. Let's talk about pads first. Brake pads in a race car, there's 3 or 4 hardnesses of pads. You can get 3 hardnesses most any places. In some places you can get 4 hardnesses of pads. go to a good high quality pad. A soft pad would be for short races. You've got to kind of treat pads like tires. The softer one will come in faster, but will go away faster, will wear out faster. So if you're going to run short distance races, 25 laps or less, then soft pads will come in your first or second lap and you'll have good brakes. If you're going to run a harder pad, say a medium pad, that would be for races in the distance of say 25 to 50 laps. And would take maybe 1 lap or 2 laps to get them warm, and you need to drag your foot on the brakes 2 or 3 laps before you go out and bring it up to speed. And then you go to a hard pad, and that's going to take 5 to 10 laps to get really good brake work in the car. It's like real hard tires. It takes a few laps to get the heat into them to get them to working good. So you need to drag your brakes for 2 or 3 laps while you're warming up, while you're getting ready to start the race to get them to come in. So these would be for your longer asphalt races. This is what you would need for your dirt races, and for your short asphalt races you could run a medium pad. But most of the time we run a hard pad, and then for our real extra distance races, 300 and 400 lap races, we go to what we call an extra hard pad. And so it requires that you drag your brakes a little bit before you go on the racetrack. Don't mix match your pads. Don't buy Kmart and put it on the front and then a good Ray Vestas and put it on the back. They'll work in different heat ranges. You'll have too much front brakes in the early part of the race and too much rear brakes, and it'll change the handling of the race car. If you got good brakes, the situation we're going to run into on the racetrack is we're going to be able to go down into this turn. We want predictable brakes, and we want good brakes. The brakes is going to affect the car at this point. If we've got too much front brakes, the car is going to push. If we've got too much rear brakes, the car is going to be loose when we apply the brakes. So you can ask the driver if it's pushing when you hit the brakes, if it's pushing when the car is loose. It's very comfortable, and the situation a lot of people get into is very comfortable to run a car with too much front brakes because it makes the car push as it goes into the turn. So you got to just slow down a little more to get the car to turn. It don't want to back into the fence on you. So when you start running too much front brakes, the car starts getting comfortable, but it's not as fast as it would be to balance the brakes out and get a proper balance on. I'll explain balance in a few minutes and how you're going to balance the brakes to get the car to be able to get into the turn at the best angle without wanting to come around and yet still have enough stopping power to get the job done. So your brakes will affect the car as you brake, as you enter the turn. Too much front brakes, push. Too much rear brakes, loose. Okay, let's talk about rotors. The rotors on the brakes are the heat sink. They absorb the energy from stopping the race car. It takes a certain amount of energy to stop a race car. Energy is heat. That heat has to go into the brake system. Well, if your rotor is big and got lots of cooling fins in it, where your air comes in and goes through these cooling fins, the bigger they are, the better they'll cool, the longer race you can run with them. Start drilling them full of holes. Let's look at it from the side view. You see a lot of guys drilling full of holes to get rid of unsprung weight. All they're doing is, first of all, is they're giving it a place to crack, and they're taking out some of the heat sink. They're taking out the rotor's ability to accept the energy from stopping the race car, so they're going to go get hot sooner and then transfer the heat into the brake fluid sooner and have a brake failure sooner. And on top of that, they'll crack more often. So rather than drill one full of holes, you would probably be better off just to take the rotor and go to buy a narrower rotor in the car if you're trying to get rid of some unsprung weight and still keep the reliability. But realize the rotor is the heat sink. They warp a little bit after they get real hot, stuff like that. They need to be taken off every once in a while and put in a lathe and cut down, take the warp out of them to keep from glazing the pads and stuff like that. Drilling holes in them will not take the glaze off the pads. The holes are the same height as the pad when it goes by, so it does not scrape the pad. I've had some people tell me, well, if you'll drill some holes, it'll keep your brake pads clean, but it will not do that. So enough about rotors. Rotors, the bigger rotor for the longer races, the thinner rotor for the short races, thinner rotor for the light car that doesn't take as much energy to stop it. Okay, let's talk about the calipers that reach around the rotor and grab the rotor to slow the race car down or to stop the race car. Take the calipers, a good set of disc calipers you can buy from General Motors. You can buy from some of the brake manufacturing companies. If you're going to buy them from General Motors or buy them out of a wrecking yard, you need to really put them on a diet. You need to take a grinder to them and grind off all the areas that don't need to be there to give you good brakes. You can rid most of them about 3 or 4 pounds just by taking a grinder to some different areas of the brakes and still not hurt the braking power of the race car. So take your rotors, either buy lightweight rotors or take the rotors that you buy from the wrecking yard and lighten them up a little bit. So that's about calipers. Okay, let's talk about bleeding the brakes. I personally bleed the brakes every week, whether they need or not. I might have a good solid pedal, but I want to bleed them and I want to get the water out of the system because the heat that's absorbed from stopping this race car is going to come through the rotor and into the calipers and into the fluid, and you'll get some moisture in the fluid because of the heat. And if you'll keep them bled off, they won't fade on you. A lot of people will go till they start having fading problems, then they bleed the brakes. If you bleed the brakes like every week, at least 2 or 3 times out of each corner of the race car, then you won't get into a problem to need to bleed the brakes all the time. Just bleed them every week, and that way you don't get into a problem where all of a sudden you're in the middle of the race and you run out of brakes. Another real important area in brakes is the fluid. Go to a good AP 550, Wildwood 550, JFZ 550. There's some good brake fluids available today that weren't available like 5 years ago that are available, and they're real reasonable. Keep the bottle sealed on them. Don't leave them out in the open where they can draw moisture out of the air. So that's a main thing about fluid is to buy a good high boiling point fluid. The higher the boiling point is, the more water it can accept and still not boil. So we're going to be running our brakes at some tremendous temperatures, so let's get a brake fluid that can allow for that. Okay, let's talk about balancing the brakes now. We've got 2 or 3 ways we can balance the brakes. Let's say this is the master cylinder inside the car. And this will be our pedal, and we'll make this rear brakes and this front brakes. So this one will go to the rear of the race car, and this will go up to the front of the race car. Well, most of these have got them on a set of screws or a set of eccentrics here that you can screw it back and forth to change the balance on this pedal. If you want 50-50 brake system, then you'd want to put this in the middle between these 2 balancers. Make sure where it screws up into the master cylinder itself that it's not too far, and keeping one of the holes closed so that you don't get bleed back every time. But what will happen then is you'll have brakes, and all of a sudden one lap they'll be gone, and the next lap they'll be there, and you'll be trying to figure out why all of a sudden your brakes went away. It's because you didn't release the pedal far enough to let the holes open up to get the fluid back down in to get another surge of fluid. So make sure that you don't do your brake adjusting on these areas. You want to do your brake adjusting this direction. Okay, so we can buy different size master cylinders. They make 3/4, they make 7/8, and they make 1-inch master cylinders. The smallest master cylinder puts out the most pressure. That's contrary to what some people think. A 3/4 master cylinder will put out more brakes than a 1-inch. It'll take more pedal, but it'll give you more pressure. So if you wanted more brakes to the front, let's say for asphalt, we want a little more front brakes, we would probably run a 3/4 to the front and a 1-inch to the rear. That'll give you 10-15% more front brakes and still leave our adjustment in the middle. We could make both of these 3/4, which means that you'll have a good hard pedal. It doesn't take a lot of pressure to stop the race car, where a 1-inch takes more pressure to stop the race car. So if you used a pair of 3/4, that would be if you were running long races and you were going to run out of leg strength. And you can run out of leg strength on the brakes, braking every turn. So if you're having problems with the brakes, you could go to a smaller master cylinder. If you feel like you don't have enough feel of the brakes, you might go to a 1-inch master cylinder and then adjust your balance this direction. So the smallest master cylinder gives you the most brakes. And you've got a combination of 3 different ones to put in the car. Plus, most cars have got a balancer to move it back and forth to adjust it. What I got on my cars is I put a brake line, just a regular brake line that goes from the frame to the brake, and they will screw right on the end of these adjusters. And then you can bring them up into the rear of the car and put a little T-handle on them. And you can set during the race and screw the brakes back and forth. When you can't screw them is when you got your foot on the brake. That might happen to you sometimes. You'll be wanting to adjust your brake while you're getting into the turn, and you've got to get your foot off the brake to adjust them. So you've got to adjust them down the straightaway. You can't adjust them while you're braking. You can put a couple of turns in it and check your brakes the next lap and see how it works. What I found is it's not so important what you start out with, it's important what you finish with. If you start out with a bad braking system and you screw it in, and the time the race is over, you really got them dialed in good, you'd like to be able to repeat that. The way I found to repeat brakes, and we'll show you out in the shop, is let's say that this is the front wheel and this is the rear wheel, and we've got a brake pedal in the car here someplace. What I'll do is I'll put a torque wrench, after I got done with the race, I said, well, this is the system that I want to run. This is the brake balance that I'd like to start with every time I go race, no matter what car I go with that onto that racetrack. I'll put a torque wrench on one of these lug bolts. I'll have somebody get in the car, and on top of the brake pedal, I'll put a regular bathroom scale. Just set it on top of the brake pedal and tell the person sitting in the car to push down 50 pounds. And then I'll see how much it takes to turn that wheel with a torque wrench, and then what it takes to turn this wheel with a torque wrench, and that'll give me my brake balance. So then I can, in the future, go back, have somebody to apply the brakes at a certain pressure and check my balance. So that's one way to check your balance without having to just run out there on the racetrack and see how much rear and see how much front's in the car. So once you've got your system, what you want, that's a way to do it. All you'll need to do that would be a torque wrench and a bathroom scale and a helper, somebody to get in the car and hold the pressure so that you can check the different torque on the wheel, front wheel, the rear wheel to see which one turns the easiest. What you want for asphalt is around 60% front for a starting point, and on dirt you want about 50-50, so 50% front for a starting point. What I do on asphalt is I'll screw too much front brakes in the car that I know is too much, and then I'll go out and start making hot laps, and I'll start continually moving to more and more rear brakes until the car starts getting a little loose, and then I'll back it back a little bit more toward the front, then I've got it about where I want it. On dirt, most of the time, the car's going to push going into the turn anyway, especially early in the night when the track's wet. So I start with a lot of more rear brake than I need. So start with like 60-70% rear brake, even though you know you're going to need 50. So I'll start with more rear and go in there, and every time you hit it, it'll get loose. It'll keep getting loose, and keep adjusting more and more front brake until it quits getting looser, until it sets the way you want it to. So that's the way I adjust the brakes at the racetrack. And then I'll come back to the shop after I've decided what the car liked for the feature, and I'll come back and put my bathroom scales on the pedal, put a certain amount of pressure so I can make sure I can keep the same pressure as I move my torque wrench front to rear, and check the numbers and put that balance down and write that down someplace so that I can, anytime I go to that racetrack, I can come up with that balance. Smallest master cylinder, most pressure. Largest wheel cylinder, most pressure. Now while we're talking about wheel cylinders, let's talk about the calipers again just for a minute. I was saying that you want to put them on a diet, you want to keep them as light as possible. You also want to take them apart and clean them about once a year. Most of these racetracks have a lot of calcium on them. You pick up a lot of rubber from the other tires and off the racetrack, and they get up in these brake systems, and they'll get to where the brakes stick all the time on you. So the thing you can do is maybe once a year, pull the brake apart, clean it with some fine emery cloth, the piston, put some new O-rings in it, put it back together. You should push it, it should push in and out fairly easily. If it's taken 4 pair of ice grips to get the thing to compress so you can put new pads on, you know you got a problem, and you need to get in there and clean the thing up with some emery cloth and get your brakes where you can hit them and they'll come back. Brakes are too important in a race car not to spend a little bit of time getting them right. So that talks about balancing a little bit. It talks about the size of the master cylinder. The wheel cylinders, remember the biggest wheel cylinder is most pressure, but the smallest master cylinder is most pressure. The size of the lines really is not important. Bigger lines will hold more volume, but it doesn't, since it's a solid mass moving through there, running big lines to the front will not give you front brakes, extra front brakes. So the size of the line really is not important to the brake balancing on the race car. Okay, what I've done here is I've taken one of the school cars and I've put it up on jack stands, took the door off so that you'll be able to see through and see what we're talking about. This is the Neal pedal system that we have here. It's got 2 master cylinders, one on the left going to the rear of the car, the one on the right going to the front of the car. Then I've got a brake line. This is a rubber brake line, the one that would normally go from your caliper into your frame on your car. And they'll screw right on the end. Then I brought it up and tied it into a regular piece of metal, went through a couple of bolts, and put myself a T-handle in here. What I can do during the race then is adjust my brakes either direction I want. If I want more rear brakes, I turn it counterclockwise. If I want more front brakes, I turn it clockwise. It's pretty hard for the driver to know which one's front, which one's rear, so what you probably need to do is, when you decide which one's front, which one's rear, is to go inside the car like I've done here, and I put an arrow, and I put an F on there for front brake. So he knows that if he turns it the direction of the arrow, that he'll have more front brakes. So I can adjust more front or more rear as the race goes on. Realize you cannot adjust that when there's pressure on the pedal. Jim, if you'll get in the car, I'll show you how to do the brake balance. First of all, you need to buy yourself a little scale like this, a $10, $15 item from Kmart. And if you'll put that on the pedal and give me 20 pounds of pressure. What I've got here then is a torque wrench, and I went ahead and tightened this lug bolt down very tight. And if he puts it at 20 pounds of pressure, then I go to try to turn this wheel, I see how many pounds it takes, and it's taken almost 70 pounds. So 20 pounds of pressure in the car is 70 pounds of front brakes. Okay, now that we've got 70 pounds at 20 pounds of pressure, we'll come back here on this torque wrench, and with the same amount of pressure, we'll see that we got 60 pounds. So we've got a little more front brakes in the car than we do rear. So our adjustment here then is, since we've got too much front brake, we'll want to go to more left. So if you take your foot off the pedal, I can turn a little more left, and then I can go through the same procedure until I get the brake balance where I want it. And then I can then, if I want, turn it all the way one way and count the number of turns, and go the other way and count the number of turns, and then when I go to the racetrack next week right before the feature, I can put it to that exact setting and go out and be the way I want to be for the race. Okay, that concludes this video. If you've run into any questions during this video, you can contact the school at the phone number or the address that'll be following.